One of the most difficult situations a leader can face is coming in as a new leader to a group or a team that already has some conflict. And that's exactly the situation that Pastor Paul Frank found himself in when he first joined as senior pastor at Hosanna Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. So what do you do as a new leader? How do you handle conflict that already exists in your team? Well, we're going to find out right now. Simplifying concepts that really help you in life, relationships, and business. This is the Speaking Easy Podcast. Pastor Paul Frank is the senior pastor at Hosanna Lutheran Church. He's been there for many years and is a second career pastor. His first career was in the film industry before he decided to go into the ministry. I sat down and talked to Pastor Paul about his somewhat tumultuous start at Hosanna Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Let's listen to the conversation.
To dive into kind of the meat of what we're talking about, did you have any inkling? You described it when we first sat down and we were looking at kind of thinking about what the nature of how Hosanna was when you first got there, and you said it was a train wreck. Did you have any inclination that it was going to be like that before you got there?
Well, a little bit. I mean, the people who were on the phone call for the phone interview were all people who were just on fire for their church, and they loved their preschool and they loved what's going on. And those were the people that that was my first impression. After accepting the call, I started hearing about, well, there are some conflicts and divisions. Okay. And so I had a conversation with a guy named Pete Alexander, who was the intentional interim pastor. Great guy. I chat with Pete still to this day. Every time we have a pastor's conference, he always wants to hear a report from Hosanna. And he did some great work there. He ended up being there in an intentional interim for 2 years. Prior to that interim, 6-7 years ago, earlier, probably about 7 years earlier, they started the preschool. When you start a preschool, it's a big investment. It requires a lot of money because on day one, when the preschool opened, it had 4 students. It's not going to operate in the black with 4 students. But you got to start somewhere. What do you have to have in order to be a preschool? You have to have a facility. You have to have the equipment, the furnishings, the games, the toys, the curriculum. You have to have staff. That's all a big investment up front. And it's got to be nice enough that it's going to convince parents that they should entrust to your care their biggest treasure in their lives, their own children. And so you can't do it piecemeal and chintzy. You got to commit. And they did. But for the first several years, the preschool operated in the red. And so it became more and more of a source of division. So you've got one camp that thinks this thing is a money hole and it's draining us and we just have to kill it off. And the other camp that says we see families coming in and we're educating children, and pretty soon a lot of those families are making connections with the congregation. And if you look at our younger families across Hosanna, almost all of them came into the church through the preschool. The preschool became the sort of front door or the front porch of the ministry when it comes to younger families. So a lot of you got 2 camps. One says it's a money hole. One says, no, you're actually drawing people into the life of the church and we're making disciples. And that's kind of what we're really all about. And along that same time, they had introduced a version anyway of contemporary worship, or what they were calling contemporary worship. It was basically one guy with an acoustic guitar who led a alternate form of worship service, a different expression of their worship service. We had a lot of folks that were kind of old school, hardline conservative. We don't want guitars and drums and things like that in our worship service. So it became very divided. And the pastor they had at the time ended up leaving in the midst of this chaos and division. And the district president at the time was familiar enough with the congregation to know they really need some time with an intentional interim, which became Pete Alexander. And what he did in his 2 years was developed a series of what he called cottage meetings, kind of small group meetings where people could talk and have some conversation. And what he was trying to figure out is, are we able to find unity? Can we be unified? For a lot of folks during that 2 years, the answer was no, and they left and went to other congregations. 2 years of this had gone by, and nothing. It wasn't really a settled issue yet, but it was time for them to go through the call process. And so I received this call. I was able to get a lot of, sort of briefing from Pastor Pete, and I had a interesting packet of information that was left for me in my desk that I read through, and I thought, there's a lot of division here.
So like a file on who to trust and who not to trust.
Well, not exactly, kind of. Just more kind of, here's some background information on here's what the divisions are about. Yeah. So do we, and for those who said the school is a money hole, it's a legitimate concern because, let's not do things that are going to bankrupt us and then the church itself is dead in the water. I came into it, and so the first thing I really needed to do, which I learned very quickly, is figure out, is there potential for growth in this preschool? Because if it's going to just bleed us to death, then maybe they're right. But what I did is I really evaluated the staff. I spoke with a lot of the congregation. I also looked at a lot of demographics in our neighborhood. What does our neighborhood need from us in way of ministry? And at the time, I looked around and I thought, there's a lot of 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom houses being built. Those are family houses. There's a lot of families living in our area. There were not a lot of preschools at the time. And I kind of thought, if I was really trying to figure out what do we want to do as a ministry, well, we have a church that runs a food bank 12 blocks down the street from us. We don't need another food bank. We're not in an area that really has homeless people or things like that. We're middle-class suburbia USA where you got families and kids, and I think our neighborhood needs a preschool. Yeah. And so rather than closing a preschool, I became a champion of the preschool. And I also felt that contemporary worship, or this other form of worship, was going to be something that would resonate with people. Although my feeling was we need something more than a guy with an acoustic guitar. Right. We need to build, a little more of a band and stuff like that.
Just out of curiosity, did your thoughts around wanting to do the preschool, seeing that was a need, did that inform your decision on thinking, okay, like this new form of worship is going to be something that might be appealing to these families?
Yeah, part of it, I kind of thought,
because I can see how the two are kind of almost together.
And that's what I thought at the time. I think this is going to go hand in hand. Plus, even in my experience back in Iowa, contemporary worship was a thing. People experienced that. I have found that a lot of our newer snowbirds today are people who tend to gravitate toward the contemporary rather than the traditional, because that's what they experience at their other church, in the North or in the Midwest someplace. And so I kind of thought, I need to be a champion of both of these things. And as soon as I really began to champion both of those things, that's when one camp decided we got to go. And frankly, I tried to work with a lot of people, and the same as the intentional interim pastor had done, try to figure out, can we create unity? Can we be united together around this shared ministry? And if the answer is yes, terrific, let's do that. If the answer is no, then I felt like I need to give one camp permission to go be a blessing to somebody else. And in my first 18 months, I had about 125 people that transferred out of the church. And in that time, I was thinking to myself, what have I done? Is it me? Am I on track here? Am I not? Here's what we found, though. After the anti-school, anti-contemporary worship camp left, we found our offerings increased. And the reason was those who remained gained confidence in what we were doing. They suddenly realized we're now united around a vision. We're also focused on the mission of Jesus Christ. One of the problems ahead of time was they really had kind of taken their eyes off of Jesus and the mission of making disciples. And so for one camp, the church was more about, we want to play church. So we get together, we sing pretty hymns, and we have church on Sunday, rather than, the vision I wanted to portray is we are the church all the time, wherever we go. And I believe, Jesus we are redeemed by Christ. We are saved. We know that. Here we are, saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. Well, now what? Well, now we are enlisted into the mission of making disciples. So we got to figure out, what do we want to do? Part of the problem they faced at the time was, well, we sing pretty hymns on Sunday, and we don't really want to do anything. And I had said to some of the people in that anti-school crowd, let's say we close the school today. Doing nothing is not an option to us. Doing nothing is free and it's easy. But that's not what God called us to. Jesus said, look at the harvest. He tells parables about sending workers into the harvest field. That's us. Here we are, we're in the harvest. So we got to do something. So I said, if we don't have a preschool, that's kind of our ministry right now. What is it you have in mind that we might do? We don't need to run a food bank. We got one of those. We don't need a homeless shelter or something. We don't, is it a crisis pregnancy center or something else? Or what do we do? And frankly, their answer was nothing. Well, we're going to go ahead and do this. Now, one of the problems we also faced was the preschool at the time had some staffing issues. We did not have the right people in the right seat on the bus. As I spent about 2 years really getting my feet on the ground, getting to know staff, getting to know lay leadership and volunteers, and trying to figure out, who really are the right voices to listen to, it was becoming apparent to me that we needed a staffing overhaul. The preschool was not going to grow. My thought was, rather than killing off the preschool because it's not financially supporting itself, we need to figure out how to create a preschool that is so appealing it will grow to the point where it will financially support itself and be a very productive ministry. And I knew at the time, we got some of the wrong people on the bus. And a staffectomy is a very painful operation to perform.
How did you go out and find new people for not only for the preschool, and not find new people, but did you find that having that unity also then attracted more people to come just within the congregation too?
Yeah. Well, part of the tension was that I'm now left with congregational members who support the preschool, and I'm wanting to change the staff that they hired. Like, they were supportive of some staff members that I knew are not in the right seat on the bus. But I had the up close and personal view of what's happening in our preschool and what the tensions are. And some of the staff members, I just had to kind of sit down and have the hard conversation and just say, look, we got to go in a different direction here. And they were clearly there for the paycheck and not for the mission, and they made their exit. A couple of staff members, they had more support that I knew. This is going to be a tense thing. But what I did was I sat down with church council, I sat down with our then board of elders, and I just sort of made my case and said, here are some problems that are going on. And some of the things were becoming apparent to especially some of the church council members at the time. And we ended up dismissing a preschool director who was also our lead teacher. Then now what do? I mean, you're in a never-ending cycle of marketing your school for next year's enrollment, and here I am with no director and no lead teacher. We were blessed by God to have a person in the congregation who was very gifted at administration and literally stepped out of retirement to help us, saying at the time, I'm going to do this for this coming school year while we make a transition. She ended up falling in love with the preschool and was our director for over 5 years and was magnificent. I give her tremendous credit for saving our preschool. She did a great job. She was so skilled and personable and organized, and all of the parents that came loved her. She's very active in the church still today. And it was under her leadership that we reworked our classrooms. We found a couple of teachers. We had 2 teachers and 2 teacher aides in 2 classrooms. And the next thing I know, we got 40 kids enrolled. Wow. And we're operating in the black, and families are coming in the door of the church. And that was the real heyday of our preschool at that point. One of the things that's happened since then is preschools have sprung up all around us. All of a sudden, now there's 10 new preschools within 5 miles of our preschool, and competition became pretty stiff. Yeah. But we ended up, when she was ready to go back to retirement, we decided we're going to create a new position that's going to be a preschool director and also work with youth and youth ministry, youth group, and so on. The funny thing was, Annie, now Anderson, Annie Tyberg at the time, she was a DCE on staff and doing youth ministry at Greenfield. And I called her and asked her, I just said, I want to get some advice because I'm trying to create this position. So she came and met with me, and I said, here's a job description that I've kind of come up with. Is this realistic? What would you think of this? And she read it through, and she gave me some really good advice on we might tweak some things. And I said, I really appreciate your advice and helping on this. And at the end of our meeting, she said, if you create this position, I'd like to be considered for it. And my first thought was, I'm not poaching staff from Christ Greenfield. But I ended up having a conversation with Pastor Allman, Tim Allman, their head pastor there. And I said, I want to be completely transparent here. I don't want to poach your staff. And I said, I'm creating this position. It's a little different than what Annie is doing at Greenfield. It's much more preschool focused. And Tim says, she would be amazing in that role. And I'm like, are you telling me it's okay?
It's okay.
And he said, essentially, it would be a great career move for her. And we're not going to hold her back. And next thing I know, here we are. We got Annie on staff. She's been a rock star in the preschool. Since then, we've expanded from 2 classrooms to 3 classrooms. And what we've done is grown younger.
That's right. You guys didn't you just get like the infant license or something like that, where they're allowed to change diapers? I remember hearing something about that.
there's a real name for it, but I call it diapering license, basically.
Exactly.
So we can, what we can do, we have a classroom that takes kids as young as 2 years old.
Yeah, wow.
And they don't have to be potty trained. And actually, potty training is part of the actual curriculum in that classroom. Yeah. So parents are coming to us now and saying, you're going to help me potty train. I'm all in. So, and that's the class that we've moved Annie into. And then we have the next class is kind of 3-year-olds turning 4, and then the pre-K class is the 4-year-olds turning 5, getting ready to go into kindergarten. And so we can have families with us now for 3 years. They can go through 3 classrooms.
It's just that much longer also to give them exposure to the church, to the gospel, to the opportunity to be a part of the church. What's really cool is I'm just kind of thinking back on your entire story. There are so many spots where you've got legitimately scary moments in your life. I mean, it's like
Oh, yeah.
jumping over it from film industry into the ministry and being faced with this division and a terrifying situation where maybe a quarter to a third of the congregation is leaving, and then having to totally revamp the staff on the preschool, some of which were somewhat contentious decisions on your part because people liked those people, and then removing the director. And then, but what's cool is that it seems like in all of these situations, I'm hearing a constant theme of, well, God just plopped this in my lap. And it just, you've got a person in the congregation who's a perfect fit for this role and really grows it. You're the person you're consulting with Annie to build up, to find a new position and design a new position ends up being the perfect person for the job. And it's just everything.
Same thing actually happened with the contemporary worship. Because we had the guy, just one guy with an acoustic guitar, and he was okay, but it was the same 6 songs over and over again. And about 3 months into being there, I sat down with him and I said, I really want to expand this kind of worship and do something, build a band and so forth. And he was commuting to Hosanna about 30 miles each way. Mm-hmm. And in that conversation, he just basically said, "I'm done. I'm tired of making this drive, and I'm not the guy for you." And I said, "Fair enough." And and so he left. And then John Snyder, he's our director of music. He and I got together, and he started doing just with keyboard. He would lead contemporary worship for a while, and we started. We said we're going to advertise and see if we can find somebody. Debbie Blau, who is our pianist who accompanies our choir, worked for Mesa Public Schools forever, and she had a good friend named Teresa Coe, and called Teresa and said, "Hey, this band or this church is looking to build a band and create contemporary worship. You should go." And so John Snyder and I auditioned about 5 different people, and some of them were pretty good, and we thought, we could work with these folks. They're pretty good. And then Teresa came and auditioned, and after about a half an hour, John and I looked at each other and said, "I think we're done." So here we are, almost 16 years later. She's still leading a praise band for us.
So looking back on the whole transition and dealing with the division and dealing with the loss of people and then dealing with God placing the right people in the place. Looking back, at the time you were not new, but newish in ministry, certainly newer than you are now in ministry. Looking back in hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently during that transition?
I would have gotten straight to the vision and mission of the church more quickly. I spent a lot of time trying to evaluate people, and looking back, it eventually did hit me. We took our eyes off the prize. The congregation had. That's where the division came from in the first place. So one camp is about money. The other camp is about, we love, having families in the room. And what they lost sight of is the calling that God has given us is to make disciples, followers of Jesus. And they had sort of lost sight of that. The healing began to come when one camp left and the other camp was able to sort of rally around their school and their church. And it took me a little too long, I think, to really get back to what are we doing for the sake of the mission of Jesus Christ? How are we going about the work of the mission field? What I have found since then is the more you preach about making disciples and being about the work of the mission, the more people remember who they really are. I always try to remind people this is who we really are. We're servants. We're disciples. We're followers. We engage in God's word. We are supposed to be in a regular rhythmic life of worship. We're supposed to be honoring God with our time and our talents and our treasures, and we have to do something. Right. Looking back, and it was what it was. I had to take enough time to evaluate who's who and what voices to pay attention to and so on. One of the things it really did teach me is to be very focused on the mission of Christ. We are gathered here not for the sake of contemporary worship or traditional liturgical style worship. We're gathered here as one body in this place on this corner of God's mission field to serve him. And one of the ways that we serve him is we run a preschool. And the preschool doesn't always finish in the black. I mean, right now we have an enrollment of 27 kids. We need to have about 35. If we got about 35 students, we kind of eke out finishing in the black. And, last year we were just about at the breaking point. I think we might have finished in the black. But one of the things we had to do was figure out we're not running the school to make money. We're running the school to make disciples and to welcome families in and to introduce families to Christ. And a lot of our preschool families are churched families. They either come to Hosanna or they go to other churches. But a lot of them are not. They just come, they came to us not necessarily seeking a Christian education. They came to us because we got a great facility, we got great staff, and we're in their neighborhood. And so we introduced them to the Jesus they might not even been looking for. And so when we're much more focused on the right vision, the right mission, we're here to make disciples, everything seems to come together pretty well. Right now, we are currently in our 23rd year of Little Palms Preschool.
Wow.
And it'll finish in the red this year, and everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
One of the key things we did...
I want to catch that too, because what a transformation too. I mean, I know it's been 20 some years, but it's like what you just said, it's going to finish in the red and everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
Getting to that point where you've got a group of people that's committed to this mission of the church to say, hey, everybody is actually on board with that. We know this isn't here for us to make money. This is here as a mission of the church.
We've embraced the disciple-making aspect of the preschool. Yeah. And one of our key decisions we made, which we did, I think it was in my 3rd year here, when they did their budget plan, they always had a budget for the church and a separate budget for the preschool. Mm-hmm. And so that fostered this us versus them mentality. And they set the preschool up knowing it's going to finish in the red, which means they have to come to us and ask for money. And I began to say to people, there's no us versus them. It's just us. The preschool is a ministry of Hosanna Lutheran Church, just like confirmation class is a ministry of Hosanna Lutheran Church, high school youth group, our various Bible study groups. We have a Monday night men's group that meets, and there's no separate budget for anything. So I convinced them after, I think it was about the 3rd year, might have been the 4th year, I convinced them, let's create one budget together. It's just us. That was a turning point, I think, in the preschool, because they figured out it generates income. It's not yet sustaining itself. Eventually it did. And many years it does finish in the black. Right. But the value of making disciples and the embrace of the vision, the mission, the making disciples message was critical for the success of the preschool, because people know now that's what it's really all about.
So is there any kind of advice, thoughts that you might give to someone who might walk into this sort of a situation, a new pastor, a new leader who might walk into a divided group of people, whether it be at a church or an organization where you've got people? Is there, what advice might you give them? Specifically, I mean, for you as a pastor, what advice might you give to a new pastor that walked into this sort of a situation?
I would say keep your eyes on the prize. Make sure that you're focused on what church is really all about. We have a beautiful music program. It's not really about the music. The music aids us in focusing on the mission of Christ. Keep your eyes on the prize. We've got a preschool that has the goal of making disciples for Jesus Christ. All of the teachers know that this is our goal. There's going to constantly be the presence of Christ in our classrooms. We're going to focus on Christ in our time of worship. We're going to rally together as a congregation to figure out how can we make an impact in our neighborhood for the sake of Christ and his mission. The reason why the church on earth exists is to make disciples for Jesus Christ. And if we're not chasing after that goal, then what are we doing? We've lost we've lost sight of the real goal. So like I said, what I would have done earlier is get back to, let's get on mission here and preach mission, chase after the mission. Success in a congregation is not measured in how many people are attending worship or how many children are in the classroom. Success is found in whether or not people are growing in their faith, in their understanding of Christ, in their relationship with Christ, in their walk with Christ. So we keep your eyes on that prize.
So there you go. That was my interview with Pastor Paul Frank, senior pastor at Hosanna Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Keep your eyes on that prize. Some other key points I picked up on while we were talking. Number one, sometimes when people leave from your team or your group or your organization, that can help inspire the people that are left over to step up because they can then have the confidence in the direction that you're taking them in. Number two, doing nothing is not an option. This, I think, is especially powerful in the ministry. We have to do something other than just playing church every week. We have to do something to forward the church on earth. Number three, be upfront with your team about what needs to happen. Just like when Pastor Paul was talking to the key members of his leadership when he was getting rid of some of the preschool staff, it's important to be upfront, be blunt, and be honest with people about what needs to happen. Number four, especially for ministry, of course, let God be your guide. So many times in Pastor Paul's story, God just provided someone or something exactly what he needed, and he does that for us when we are in service to him and his ministry. And lastly, number five, know the reason for what you're doing. As Pastor Paul talked about, the purpose of their preschool was not to make money, it was to make disciples. And everybody understanding that reason is what allowed them all to buy in to actually keeping the preschool even when it was running in the red. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll catch you next time.